Hi, welcome to the Cyber Show. I'm Cherry Sigmund, your host, cybersecurity authority, consultant, and entrepreneur. We have a very special guest for you this evening, Miss Dawn McCarty, who is an information security engineer who will be joining us to tell her story and what she's up to on the backyard business banter segment of the show. So we cover four things. First is a cybersecurity tip of the day. The second is a cyberspace toolkit recommendation. Third is a fear, uncertainty, and doubt, or FUD buster. And then we dive into the backyard business banter. So start with number one. Let's go. Here we go. Cybersecurity tip of the day has to do with your favorite platform, Zoom, and a list of, actually it's a combination of the security tip of the day and the cyberspace toolkit recommendation. And so I can afford Dawn a little more time because she has a lot to share with you today. I'm going to combine number one and number two, just make an executive decision on the fly. So if you email this one address, you'll get both the cybersecurity tip and the cyberspace toolkit recommendation of the day, because it's not just about Zoom and all the other platforms that are out there for collaboration and sharing right now. Just recently, the National Security NSA, the National Security Agency, the NSA in the United States, has done some research on different types of tools and different security measures, and they have a chart that's been publicly released. It's an unclassified public domain, and it has a long list of security questions to ask yourself that you want to know before you use one of these platforms, and then it has a chart that assesses where each of the platforms are in response to those questions. So that's something that obviously would take about 30 minutes to explain one by one, and without the visual aid of the chart. It's just something that's better for you to get by email. So the cybersecurity tip and the toolkit recommendation, you'll get both of those if you email jitsec@gmail.com. That's John India Tango Sierra Echo Charlie @gmail.com. jitsec@gmail.com. So moving on into number three. Section 3 is our FUD buster, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And I will say simply to you, if you have concerns about your career or what the future looks like for you, whatever your financial picture might be, the best advice I can give you is to scale up, to level up. And that's what I've been doing a lot of, and doing training and personal development during the slower times during the pandemic. And that's actually how I met Dawn initially, was through our business coach, JT Fox. I was skilling up and doing some things and some coaching. And then Dawn was introduced as a new family member to the community, and she started doing some coaching also with JT Fox. So he introduced us and we connected, and that leads me to part 4, the backyard business banter. And I will turn it over to you, Dawn. Again, Dawn McCarty is an information security engineer. She's with a major healthcare provider, a major healthcare company in the Fortune 50, actually near the top of the Fortune 50. And take it away.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. So where should we start? Where do you want me to start? Where I started?
Yes, please. Where you started.
Okay. So I started over a decade ago, actually, and I was a stay-at-home mom. And after my youngest son was born, I decided I needed to get back into the workforce. And before I left, I was still working in the DOS section. So, you know, when you had to use the keyboard to actually maneuver around. So I decided I was going to do medical billing, and I was going to work at home, and I was going to be there with my kids. And I ordered a computer, and I pulled out this thing with the big long cord attached to it. And I'm thinking, what is this? And it was actually a mouse. So I had to totally relearn everything that I thought I knew about computers. And so I enrolled in school, and I decided I was going to go learn how to use a computer, because the guy that I bought the computer from wasn't too happy with me. So I decided I needed to learn how to do it myself. So I went and put myself through school and started working as a network engineer right off the bat. And I'm making cables and cords and stuff like that for major organizations down here in Florida, and running the lines. And it was really interesting. And fast forward, 20 some odd years, and I'm still working in IT in the security sector. And it's been a really good career for me to raise my children, and they, have everything that they have needed. And now that they're adults, I'm setting off to find new passions to add to my, my achievements, which are my kids. So here I am. Now I'm in cybersecurity. You're in cybersecurity. So it's great to meet other people in this industry and collaborate, brainstorm with what we can solve with the problems going forward. And especially in the time and the age today where we're all at home and there's a whole nother set of security issues and data issues, and how are we protecting it at home? We're used to, work protecting it. You walk through the doors and you have the shield around you, right? And you're protected, but now you're doing it at home. So how are we protecting our data is, sort of what I focus on my day, during my day job, is keeping that protected no matter where you are in the world.
And with so many people working remotely now, all of a sudden with the pandemic and a lot of people scrambling to get those capabilities and that capacity up, I'm sure there are a lot of steps that might have been missed had it gone through the normal accreditation
Absolutely.
process. So we have a much more massive exposure, along with the exposure from the last mile with the telcos, because you have your corporate infrastructure, but then you have so many people working from home and so many different telephone companies, and then they're responsible. If you have the last mile, so you don't know about the security of that, just as an example. So how things are configured, how people have things set up, who they're sharing their home computers with, are the kids getting on playing games? And we can go down the whole rabbit hole about games with the Face app and the TikTok and all the other social media apps and the type of fun things to do that might be not so good from a data protection standpoint, but that's a whole other section a little bit later. But I like our conversation earlier when we're brainstorming and collaborating about different things that you can talk and teach about in terms of cybersecurity and specifically data protection and your expertise in identity, because I heard you say you'd done a lot with identity access and management, and then as well with identity theft and expert witness and forensics. So do you want to speak to that a little bit about that part of the conversation?
Yeah. So I most of my background was in identity and access management and trying to make sure that nobody had access that didn't need access, and going through that role-based access control model and trying to teach organizations how to use it, how to implement it. And I actually went through a whole process of setting up a new file structure based on role-based, because it's easy to implement something new, but it's hard to go back and implement it in things that are already done. And that's a pet peeve of mine. I really hate it when, I shouldn't say the word hate it, I shouldn't say hate it, but I dislike when you bring in something new, you don't make sure that you make it, that it's compatible for one thing, or that you can retroactively implement it. Right. So, and then you end up with these security risks. So that's what I kind of dug into, and I started digging up cans of worms, and I kind of got the nickname of, the cleaner or the raptor, or, a couple different nicknames. So quite possibly the fixer. Yeah. So, it became a job of problem solving, and, I have a knack of running into things totally by mistake. I don't mean to, but I do. I end up finding problems, and then I'm usually the one that has to find the solution for it. So that's not always easy, but it has definitely been rewarding to find some pretty big solutions, especially in the areas that I've worked in. I've worked for 3-letter acronym kind of organizations. Right. I've worked for federal organizations, federal government. I've worked for major corporations and working for a major healthcare corporation, and I see the same problems in all areas, and it just kind of it doesn't get resolved. So
we have a lot in common there too, both in the public and the private sector, with the federal government and the 3-letter agencies, and now the Fortune 50, Fortune 500, Global 500. So I think there's a lot of touch points there that we could talk about and collaborate on. I think that's why JT introduced us, and I'm glad he did. So in terms of identity, and not just identity and access management, but identity protection is what you might be offering here in the near future. You have a lot of experience in things related to identity. And we were talking along the taglines for, you might have a future show here on Millionaire Flix, something, working title. Can I disclose the working title? I mean, we haven't or anything on that yet. Okay, and so tentatively, the working title for Dawn's new show will be The Fixer. And it'll have subcategories that will be, fleshed out later, but she will be the show will be The Fixer. And underneath that are different categories of things related to cybersecurity or business or even family type things. So she has a lot of content and really good experience related to solving family problems. And which probably go into on your show a little bit later. But that's the working title, The Fixer. You can let us know feedback on that. And also the tag, the working title, the tag, about the data and the identity. Is that okay to share too?
Sure. Go for it.
This is what you do. You always, even if you had a previous conversation, and because this is being recorded and shared publicly, you always, when you're dealing with data or somebody's idea of intellectual property, you always want to ask permission and never just assume that it's okay. That's just the courteous thing to do, the professional courtesy. And anytime you're dealing with colleagues, prospects, or clients, you always want to be very conscious about and sensitive to the fact that it's their data. Just because they signed a disclosure or maybe, you know, terms and conditions, just as a blanket statement, and half the time people don't even read those. Always, when it's something that has to do with their data and especially intellectual property, always make sure you give them the courtesy of asking permission. So that's just a teaching point as we go through this. So we also want to show you the process of how people can collaborate versus competing, and how teaching points can be things that you do and don't do just in business in general. So if you have a person you're collaborating with or a partner, always don't assume that if you're sharing something publicly that just because you talked about it privately that it's okay. Because once you put it out there in the world, as you know, you can't take it back. And we don't want anybody to steal your ideas. So that's about that. But if it's okay to share the tagline, I'll also share that.
Yes.
Thumbs up?
Thumbs up.
Okay. So we're talking about how the data is the new oil, and that's common in our profession of cybersecurity, especially with large corporations and companies, both public and private organizations, because there's so much data flowing around the world. I mean, the world thrives on data, marketing of data, mining of data, management of data. It's all about the data. So a common phrase that we often hear and use is, quote, data is the new oil. So based on that, we were just brainstorming and talking back and forth and said, well, data is the new oil, and you're specializing in identity. How about if data is the new oil, identity is the new gold, and see how that resonates with you and how that lands with you. And I think that has some merit worth exploring there. So what do you think?
I think so.
Data is the new oil, identity is the new gold. You want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, yes. And, identity is actually a very important thing. It's something that we all deal with on a daily basis in all different kinds of aspects. So when you think about identity management, most of the time we're talking about IT. We're talking about how people can access or authenticate into certain systems, right? Then we have identity, like you were just talking about, the IP. So intellectual property is something that you branded or you created, so it's part of your identity, right? So these are things that, they're not tangible, but you kind of own them because you created them. And, like anything, it's you create it, you raise it, you want to set it off into being something that is sustainable on its own and secure. So we have that, and that's in data in general as well. So not just intellectual property. We're talking about private healthcare information. We're talking about personal identifiable information. We're talking about payment card industry information. We're talking about all kinds of things that we need to protect because those are our identity. Our credit cards, it's a piece of plastic, but it's who we are. It's something that we have that we use in our day-to-day life, and all things kind of come back to identity. And there's also the forensic side. So I also do forensic document examination, and I am a forensic handwriting expert, and I've trained law enforcement officers how to use handwriting in their interrogations or their interviews so that they can kind of get an idea of what's really going on and who's telling the truth, who might be lying, because it's not an exact science, but we follow the ASTM standards. So there is a science behind the authentication side of it for the document examination. And again, it's identity. So who signed that will? Was it forged? So I go in and I evaluate it, I examine it, and I use my little forensic tools, and I determine whether or not I believe if the right person authored that same document or if they're the same as the other document. And then, of course, you could go into an expert witness if needed. Hopefully we don't ever get to that because, I've never had to go to court yet.
Yeah, that takes up a lot of your time.
Nope, sorry.
Actually, I have to win your dogs. Don't worry about it. They're used to it. Everybody's
They heard me knock on wood, and now they think someone's here.
Your cat, whatever, goes back. They have the dogs barking. It's okay. Everybody's used to it. It's part of the new normal.
Good.
We're all working from home, and then we're doing this for free. So you know, you can't complain, right? We're giving you
Right.
the
Hey,
so
you know, we're real. We're authentic. We're real human beings, and we have dogs.
We have lives and the things going on in the background. So apologize for the dogs noise. And so far my wiener dogs have been quiet, but I think people are accustomed to this now. And again, it's not like they're paying us our normal consulting fees, right? So,
so back to the identity thing, you know, this was something as we were collaborating, you really kind of pulled some of this out, which was really, you know, like the additional breakthrough. So JT gave me a couple ideas to work with, and I've been mulling them over. And then with that, talking to you, we actually broke through a little bit further and you know, expanded on that. And I think it's you know, some really good information, really good, exciting things I think can come out of this. But identity also goes back to, you know, who you are as a person and where does that start. So there's also in the family realm that you mentioned.
Yeah.
As children, we grow up into somebody. That's your identity, and sometimes that's interrupted. You know, sometimes that family bond is obstructed, and it does form somewhat of an identity type crisis. So this is how the family side comes into it. So I didn't realize it until you said it, that everything I do revolves around identity.
It really does.
Everything I do. So that was really kind of a light bulb.
It was an immediate download. I mean, it just came to me, and I was listening carefully for what you were saying, and wait a minute. And I let you finish what you're talking about, and then I paused, I listened, I absorbed, and then I said, wait a minute, and I'll let you finish again. And I said, do you realize that you're talking about identity again? I think that might be a pattern in your life. Is that true? And it is. And I think
I'm a serial identity person.
A serial identity entrepreneur. Yeah. But I think there's a lot there because it speaks to your core skills and your passions, and from your early childhood to your adulthood to your transition from what you're doing from one profession and deep diving into the other. It goes deep vertical with you. So, I mean, it's really a deep vertical approach. And then now with the cybersecurity side and identity protection, identity theft, identity management, I mean, all of that, there's so much you could do with that. And what you just mentioned here, Dawn, about the signature analysis and the working with law enforcement officers with the LEOs and even lawyers. I mean, there's so much you can do there, whether it's reviewing wills. I mean, I can only imagine right now that there are probably a lot of legal documents being updated from the medical side, whether it's, you know, people's last wishes, whether it's their last will and testament, whether it's their last will and testament, whether it's their DNR, or do not resuscitate, whether it's their living will, but all the medical documents and things that people are having to face right now during the pandemic is a very real world
exactly
having updating the documents. And I would imagine that the lawyers' offices are really fully engaged in that sort of thing with paralegals and, you know, making sure that the signatures and the witnesses' signatures are not, you know, fake. I think there's a little subject here when you're teaching people how to, you know, make sure that nobody's getting over on people while you know, have somebody who's sick and comes in and abuse that privilege to, you know, be an undue influencer, that sort of thing. And the forensics skills you have are very valuable there, because I know we talked about the medical space, but in the medical industry, but there's also something within the legal industry that's really possibly relevant right now. You might want to talk to JT about later, but it's, you know, it's something we're talking about, and we're even now we're doing the show. We're on the cyber show. We're doing brainstorming.
We're building
other things that could be of value, because the idea is that where I'm coming from is I stand for the little guy and the little gal, because I know that a lot of people are frustrated in small businesses. With the PPP, the payroll protection program, a lot of the big companies came in and swept up some of the money. A lot of them with the lion's share of the money. A lot of smaller businesses didn't get it, and there was a big pushback and a lashback on that. Now, some of the major companies have in turn returned that money, or are supposed to return that money. I haven't heard that Potbelly has yet done that, but just as an example, it's often, even though small businesses are the backbone of the majority of a lot of the American economy, just in general, because we're in the United States. I'll speak to the U.S., even though this is a global audience. Just as an example, within the United States, that's kind of what we have. So, you know, there's something there in terms of being the people who are doing things for small businesses that'll enable them and not take advantage of them, when everybody seems to be looking out for the big guy. The big companies get the bailout, they get the payroll money, and all that. But I think the second round is actually going better for small businesses. So when I saw that, I decided that I was going to branch out more and stand for small businesses and offer cybersecurity consulting at small business prices. And that's like insanely ridiculous low fees for consulting, but it helps get them on the right path, including a free self-assessment checklist. This, you know, just a way to have them, here's something you can take a look at and see whether you even want to pursue this or not. And then from there, dive into other things. So that's how I was approaching this, and I suggest you might want to explore that, and depending on where you want to focus your energies and time outside your 9 to 5. It's just an option, because it's like the world's your oyster. There's so much you could do, and there's a long-term critical shortage of people who do what we do for profession. So I think last estimate was somewhere around the ballpark figure, round number of 1.5 million globally. But
that we're short of.
We're short of,
and that was a 2019 number. So
2019 number, yeah.
We've grown since then in the need. So I'm sure that number has, it's got to be more than that, really, because I really don't think that 1.5 million I think it would be able to sustain, but it wouldn't be able to do more than that. It would still be at capacity. So we definitely need
more skilled workers, and that's mainly for jobs, different corporations, and it's. I don't believe the numbers really count all the small businesses. They may count some, but I'm not sure what the market cap is on that. But
I don't think so. And the small businesses are
left out.
They're really important, because that's who we go see all the time. We see more small businesses in our day than we do the corporations. If you go to a bank, that's fine. But then, where do you go for lunch? Or, who are you dealing with? Even your friends and neighbors are, they could be small businesses. So that's your community, your tight-knit community. And
a lot of my neighbors have businesses.
Paying attention to them and their data, then, if we can't just protect data at the top level, we gotta also teach from the bottom up as well. The top level should be the examples, and they should be protecting us. We need to help small businesses and the average users, because a lot of the average users, for example, Zoom, I think is a good example, where there's a lot of problems that came into that, right?
Yeah. But make sure I locked the meeting. Okay, I double checked. We locked the meeting.
Good job. And you didn't reuse this password on the last meeting, right?
No.
So, and that's the thing, is people don't realize that, they have a meeting ID and they have a password that's auto-generated. And so they just keep sending that same invitation out over and over. So and I even know a couple people that have been using that same meeting invite for over a year, or for however long they've used Zoom. And some of them have been using them for a pretty long time. Yeah. And that means that for however length of time that you've used Zoom, that's how many people have access to your meeting room with your password. And if you've never changed it, and I see people posting it on Facebook all the time, we're having a Zoom meeting at such and such a time, and I can view you because it's set to public. So if I can view it, anybody in the world can view it, and therefore they can come and join your meeting. And
that's the Zoom bombing. It's Zoom bombing. Yeah.
Zoom bombing. So we need to teach the average users as well. And, I think that helps. And, we need to focus on data in general, not just data that the organizations collect and gather from us, because we so freely give it out. They say, give me your phone number, hey, if you want this article, I'll give it to you. Just give me your email address, your phone number, your date of birth, whatever. I need to make sure you're old enough to read my article that I wrote. All kinds of reasons why they ask for this personal information, right? They don't know who you are. They don't know how old you are. You don't realize where that is going. Where are they storing it? How are they protecting it?
Exactly.
And what's the cloud? The cloud is, our favorite saying is, somebody else's computer.
Exactly. Somebody else has operational control over that.
Yeah. And we think, okay, well, they'll protect it, but it's really our job, our personal job, to protect our own data.
Yeah. And do our own due diligence. Yeah.
Exactly.
And for example, some of the, the games you'll see on, not to pick on any specific social media site, but just games in general float around different social media platforms. And, so even some of my relatives, the younger relatives, used to send me these little things to play the games. And I'm like, sorry, I'm a security professional. I'm not going to play the game. I love you. You're my family member, but I don't play these little games because of the security risks they pose. And it's just the risk factor there, as well as things with, the China-based companies, whether it's TikTok or FaceApp. FaceApp, so many people on Facebook specifically using the FaceApp.
Is that the one that enhances the look?
Yes, and Chinese intelligence is basically building profiles on people, and going after dossier. So now they have your face, and with the future of, everything being so connected, the Internet of Things. Their capabilities are really, really, really astute, and they're very.
So I used one of those apps one time. I thought, oh, I'm not posting any pictures unless it's enhanced. So I actually said, oh, look, I could use this. And I did. And I posted it up there and I'm thinking, how do they do that? So I started looking into it and then I'm realizing, oh, this is something nobody should do. No, this is bad. This is bad. Don't do that. So I was like, stop playing these games. Don't play the name game. Don't play the, what is it? Oh, something. Oh, whatever. Yeah, these are collection things.
They're data collectors. They're data collectors.
Yeah, it's basically a survey, right? They're asking you a little survey for a bit of your information.
Oh, I mean, I don't do any surveys. It's like, even in the profession, I get a lot of requests to do surveys, salary surveys, topic surveys. And even though I know where they might be coming from, I still don't, because I only give my personal data out where I have to and where I want to, unless it's for the government. Now that's a whole other story. It seems like since we both work for the federal government and we had security clearances, and I won't speak to what we have now, but anybody who has a security clearance definitely shouldn't use TikTok or FaceApp on a regular basis.
Exactly.
As a counterintelligence risk. But specifically, they recommend that people with clearances be really careful about your social media profiles. Even something I use often is LinkedIn, and don't mention that you have a clearance on there. There's a certain thing you can say, but people, nation states, the bad actors and hackers, they go through and they scrape all this publicly available information on social media and round up that profile. And that's a segue into what we were both victim to, that we have no control over. That was the massive OPM data breach. I've actually been one of the people that gets the letters about many data breaches, whether it's a credit card or from Target or American Express, a lot of these things. But the biggest one for people in the federal government, or whether it's a defense contractor or energy, whoever the company might be, anybody who's had any security clearance in the company and the government had to fill out a form, a standard form 86, and through a tool. And the tool name doesn't really matter, but it's a tool that everybody uses. And that particular database was hosted offsite, not on an OPM server, but they weren't managing the security controls well on whoever was hosting that. So it was just a major cluster. Okay, it was a major mess. And
yes, it was.
Millions of people who've ever supported the government, been in the military, supported the federal government, been a federal contractor, had all their personal data
hacked by APT1.
Crazy. And it also involves not just our data, but our friends, like your ex-boyfriend, husband, your
children,
kids,
your parents.
It's very vast, because when the government does an investigation on you, it's very thorough, depending on the level you have.
Yes.
And 10 years or more, 5 years or more, it just depends. And they do them recurrently every year, every few years. So there's a sequence there. So it's old information and it's also fresh information. So that intelligence agency got a treasure trove of information on us, and there's nothing we can do about it. So we kind of, we and I were joking. It's not really something to joke about because it's painful, but it's like, well, we're already screwed. So it could, some degree of risk.
Well, and they got our fingerprints on this one too.
Yeah,
so that was something that and I've joked about it, and it really isn't something to joke about. But really the seriousness of it is that I no longer own the only set of fingerprints. So, that's something to consider too. How are we protecting that data? That's biometric. So
yes, the biometrics for
how are we protecting that now? How am I going to be totally sure that my fingerprints are not being used somewhere else? I can't. Neither one of us can.
It's really a crazy new world. Yeah. But that was a massive thing. The Office of Personnel Management, OPM data breach, was a really big one for all the security clearance data, the fingerprints, the potential for fake biometrics. I mean, our politicians have to deal with fake news. We have to deal with fake identities.
Yeah,
and it's not just in the space. Identity theft in terms of credit.
So I started something after that, and I took it to my employer then, and I started with the top 3 security breaches, and one of them was OPM. And I said, this is why I need you to listen to, you hire me to be this expert, right? So let me be the expert. When I bring suggestions, and I worked with another guy on this too, and when we make suggestions to the organization that hired us to do this job, we need organizations to be willing to take that expert advice and implement it, at least one. So we have a board of directors that wants to hear what we have to say, but they're ultimately the ones that make that final decision, right? So here we're saying to secure our security, or to better secure our posture, we need to implement this, this, or this. We need to put a SIM in, or we need to have DLP, or, you know, and these are acronyms and I don't need to explain them. It's the point is the story is that when we go to our board of directors and they say, well, you know, that's going to cost $2 million, but I'll only be fined $125 million if there is a breach. So I'm going to accept the risk because I'd rather pay $125,000 rather than the $2 million. And that is not how we protect data. That's not how we should be protecting data. So the right thing to do is to spend the $2 million, figure out how to budget that, you know, and implement something. One, if I give you 5 things, just implement one of them, at least so I feel that I was valued and I continue to work towards that. But when we're not listened to, then we go back to our desks with our heads hanging down and we're like, what's the point? You know, if we're going to fight so hard to try and find solutions and then they're not implemented, you know, that's why we have a shortage. That's one of the reasons why we have a shortage in professionals, because we keep changing jobs. So it makes it look like we're filling jobs, but we're not really filling jobs. We're really kind of, we're swapping. So this employer is like, oh, I'm going to dangle the carrot and I'll offer them more money and I'll get them on my team. And so they move. And guess what? That person moved over there. And then that person goes and fills that position that you just left. We're just doing this constant shuffling of what already exists. We need more professionals to come in and actually start staying. And organizations can help by, you know, taking in some of those suggestions and actually improving their posture.
I agree, and actually have something to add to that. It could be whether, and it also speaks to small business. So if you're a small business owner or entrepreneur, when you have something like that done, take that, you know, for what it's worth, and actually look at what can you afford now, what the trade-off is in the risk. Look at the whole risk management, the whole framework there, and then we'll plug in the formula and see, you know, kind of how you want to handle that. But if you have a risk committee or a board of directors or advisory board, any type of governance, risk, and compliance construct within your company, if you don't have one in your smaller business, you should have one. You should have a GRC, a governance, risk, and compliance entity within your company, or at least a person who has that role, whether it's an additional job or their core job, to make sure you're covered with compliance issues, and specifically the privacy laws. And I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit with the California Consumer Privacy Act that came about the first of this year, and the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation for Europe, the European Union. There's 2 good examples that they were both familiar with. But you have liabilities out there. So there are things where, you know, just like having disclaimers on your website of how the terms and conditions and how the privacy statement and all of that, which
how it's used, who's using it. Yeah,
came about in the early 90s. You didn't see a lot of that. It was just the website, and that was it. There were no legal notices at the bottom, but you need to have those. I've seen some quote internet marketers selling templates for that, but I don't think they're security professionals. I think maybe they had some lawyer put a package together, but there's a whole lot of space there where it could be serving actually reviewing it from a legal and a security perspective on the terms and conditions, the legal agreements, whether it's compliant with the California Consumer Privacy Act, the GDPR, all of that. Not just telling people what it's about, but reviewing it and see if it's accurate. And if they don't have everything done that they need to do, a small business owner or an entrepreneur needs to have some sort of governance, risk, and compliance function to make sure that their company can't be fined or sued, or basically lose a lot of customer confidence and their reputation. Because when you have a brand, you want to specifically protect your reputation, because once that's damaged, you know, it's not about just the Benjamins. Reputation is more valuable than just that year's profit loss statement.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah, that's one of the
there.
things I did at my current job now is I was one of the first members of the new governance team. It was my manager and myself. And I went and I started knocking on doors of other departments in security saying, we need a voting member. We need somebody that can be part of this team that can help us tweak policies, because, you know, you either enforce them or you make the policies, but you don't do both, right? So we need someone. We have a policy department. They create those policies. This team implements them and we enforce them. So we need to have somebody from each of these groups. And then there's a couple other groups too that we include. And then you have different types. So data protection involves data in motion, which is sort of like your emails or something you're posting online. Then you have data at rest, which is documents or files that are sitting on your server or on your workstation. So what is just sitting there? And that's something that we look at to see if there's any protected data in. So we have all these different groups that we need to include into our governance so that when we make a change to the policy or the configuration, it's not, my team can't make that decision, but neither should the team that implements it, right? So we have a voting member board that comes together and we talk about the issues. We decide what's going to be the best course of action. And then we have another level up above that, where if we can't decide what we should do, or if we think, okay, this is above our pay grade, we shouldn't be making this decision, then we take it up to that board and then let them make the decision. But we had to put that in place, and it's not necessarily an automatic thing in a lot of corporations or small businesses.
Yeah, so you have the separation of duties, and you have this construct and executive level decisions, whether it's a risk committee, an executive committee, an advisory board, or the board, and then even the teams in the meetings. And I like that, where you have the voting members and then the participating members.
Exactly.
And that sort of thing. You know, and I think that's another great segue into something we're talking about in terms of the records. It could just not be digital records that are already gone through digital transformation, but it could be something such as a medical office that has these old filing systems where the cabinets physically expand and collapse, and all the records, or the big jackets, are these thick cardboard files crammed in there. Do you want to share that little story?
Yeah, so I go into, I was going to the chiropractor, so I'll share that much. I'm not worried about that. So I walk into this chiropractor's office, and the first thing I think of is, holy beep. And I just could not believe what I saw. I saw the biggest wall of files that was behind the desk, but within 25 feet of the front door. Yeah. And it's from floor to ceiling, and I don't know how wide, but there's got to be 100,000 files there easily, if not more, because, you know, those things aren't necessarily that. It's like, what is his whole history of every single patient he's ever had? And the lady gets up from her desk and she walks down the hallway. It's this long hallway, and I'm thinking, where is she going? What? And so I walk up, and she hands me, when she comes back, she hands me this clipboard full of all these pieces of paper that she wants me to handwrite all of my private healthcare information, any ailments I may have had. Have you been diagnosed with this? Are you that? You know, all this stuff. And I'm thinking, yeah, no. You can ask me these questions verbally and I'll tell you verbally, but I'm not filling this out. And she just looks at me like, why? And I said, okay, so my job is data security, and I cannot fill this out and go to my work the next day and you know, feel good about myself. So if you want to ask me questions and you want to put it in your computer that at least has a password protection, at least I hope, then we can go with that. I said, but I don't want my data ended up on that wall.
What do you mean? We always store our records like this.
I'm like, oh my God,
20 years.
Yeah. I went to work actually, and I present every week. I present the 3 top breaches, and unfortunately, I'm backdated because I'm still in March of this year when I teach this every week. So I bring forward 3 breaches, and I had to bring in this one. I'm like, okay, this one wasn't actually listed, but let me ask you, what would you do if this happened to you? And they just thought I was telling a story. And I'm like, no, this really happened. This really, is real. Yeah. So it's like, so what should we do? What do we do to fix that? Because, you know, anybody could have walked in. When she walked to the back of the office, I could have walked in and grabbed a handful of those files and been out the door, and she wouldn't have noticed. She wouldn't have known.
Yeah, exactly.
And if they had cameras, you know, half the time they're not on, or they're not recording, or, you know, they had to be right there. They don't have a DVR, or they're not backing it up to whatever so that they can replay it. So it depends on what their technology is, if they're even capable of having that kind of security system involved, where there's, you know, this protected data kind of stuff just sitting. So you got to have barriers and, you know, levels of security, and it's never a one solution. It's not just the key to your front door. You know, it's the dog. It's, you know, what else are you doing? You put locks on your windows. You protect things in your home. You have an alarm on your car. These are all layers of protection. And, so that's the same thing with security, but the more layers you put in there, the more security steps that they'd have to get through. You want to exhaust them before a hacker can ever get to it. You want to just like wear them out and make them guess. But here you make it so easy when it's just right there, 25 feet away from the front door.
Yeah, so you have the gates guards and the guns and all that sort of thing, plus what the things you mentioned from a personal perspective from home. And so it's not always just the digital layer. It could, or just cyber. It could not just cyberspace. It's the physical security, environmental controls, the HVAC. If your air conditioning goes out and your computer gear, your servers overheat, you could, have a denial of service that you created on yourself by not managing your environmental controls or fire suppression, all kind of things like that. So, I mean, we could talk about this forever, go down a lot of different rabbit holes. But I think I think we covered the gist, and just kind of cover what we talked to. This is like the kind of like backyard business banter. So is anything else you'd like to add in closing, Dawn?
And so I'd back up to that a little bit. And that's something that I think is worth mentioning, that when I have done the forensic document examination, most of the time, it's usually a will. Wills are probably the number one thing that are forged. And there's no laws against forging a will, because you're in probate court. You're not really in, criminal court, right? Nobody's pressing charges because no crime has really been conducted at that time. So most of the time people get away with it. And when you bring in a forensic document examiner and the opposing party says, oh, wait a minute, I'll settle. That's the beauty of those kind of cases, is when they realize that there's somebody there that can say whether or not you signed that document. But what's interesting is the technology behind it, and where are you storing this information? Most of the time people might have an electronic file of their will sitting on their computer on a folder on their desktop, or it's not locked down or protected either. So these kinds of documents need to be in a password protected location on your computer. If you have to password protect a file, if you have to put it on a thumb drive that goes in a vault, there's got to be protection around this kind of stuff. And then the signature that's on there, that's the signature for each of us, is really what your identity is to the world. It's your badge to the world. So your handwriting could be super sloppy, and then you have this unique style to your signature. And maybe it's legible, maybe it's not. That's kind of, it's totally different characteristics than it is in your handwriting. Mm-hmm. So that's why there's people that can try and forge a signature that has a hard time, because there's a personality that comes out in your handwriting. And there's a lot of things that can't be faked. You can fake it for a little while, but you're gonna slip up. And the more that we can look at the samples of writing, the more we can say, yeah, so we can tell whether or not someone actually authenticated or actually signed that document versus this document or whatnot. So protecting your signature is also very important. You don't want to go and have the same signature out in the world that you sign your mortgage or your bank statements with. So I have a couple of different variations of my signature. So when I'm out in the public world, I use a scribble signature that nobody can really read. They wouldn't even guess who actually signed it. And then when I sign my legal documents, that's when I use my legal signature. And so nobody gets that signature. That's another important aspect too.
I like that.
Your identity.
So I hear you saying one's like a doctor's signature where it's scribbled.
Yep.
My brother's a doctor, so
too.
You can't read his writing, so it's just a scribble. So it's like one's a scribble on purpose, like a doctor's handwriting, and the other is your legal handwriting, where it's carefully, meticulously proven to be you, and you
exactly
protect it that way. That's a really good tip, Dawn.
Yep. So you got to protect it all. Everything you do is about your identity.
There you go. All right, well, folks, thanks so much for coming on, Dawn. We're going to wrap up this episode of the CyberShow, but I'd like to encourage you to look on Millionaire Flicks here in the near future for Dawn's new show, tentatively titled The Fixer. And just remember, folks, data is the new oil. Identity is the new gold.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate being here.
The CyberShow.